Well, we Americans talk a lot about unity. But if we dig deep down, division is really what defines us as a nation. The divide we currently see in our political system is troubling, but really it's nothing new. And let's be honest, we are tired of the nonstop political ads where one candidate tells us how bad the other candidate is and how they're unpatriotic, and if the other guy wins, that America will be destroyed. Most of us, I can speak for all of us, most of us at least, that we're happy when this is over. But then November comes and the campaign goes away, but the political fighting continues. This is nothing new. Politics has always been a game to see who can stretch the truth and maintain power while doing so. And even those historical leaders that we lionize, those ones that we respect and admire, even they had questionable political practices. But there are times, and we've seen it, there are times when unity does define who we are, but unfortunately it's only for a few days or a few weeks. And it's often after some kind of national tragedy. And then things get back to normal. We get a taste of unity, and then division over politics takes over again. And the fighting doesn't just stay in Nashville or Washington. Social media has wrecked friendships and severed families because of political disagreements. I'm with this candidate, and anybody else is out to destroy America. Isn't that how our political system is structured? For most of us, unity is good so long as the other person believes what I believe. Sure, there are a few political issues that we stand firm on without exception, but have we made the political system and politicians into an idol? And I'm guessing right now, some people are either not happy with what I just said, or you're thinking, well, yeah, so-and-so needs to hear this. Not me, but somebody else does. Let me pose this to you. Would you think of me any different if I voted against your preferred candidate? What if I had a different source of news than you do? See, this is a danger that every church faces. No matter the size or culture or location or anything else, no matter what things come inside the church, anything that divides the church other than a first-tier issue, those essential issues, those doctrinal foundations, anything that divides the church over stuff beyond that does not bring God glory. This is what we see of fighting in churches today. So you say, well, why? I think it's because we've forgotten to apply the gospel to our lives every single day. We've taken our eyes off of what really matters, and instead we've given our attention to our preferences and what we think is best. Well, the verses that we just read together were written to a church that was defined by their disunity. In the text, I see three main ideas, and these are the three main points that are going to come through the service that should guide our hearts when faced with the prospect of disunity. The first is the proper view of ourselves. The second is the proper view of others. And the third and final point is the proper view of God. And the hope and the idea that I have this morning is that when we see these proper views of ourselves, of others, and of God, we get to see things through a different lens. It helps us to seek out unity. Because we put value in others, we put value in God, and we see ourselves for who we really are. That's the first thing that we see. It's found in verses 18 through 20. It's the proper view of ourselves. The setting for this letter is a church that is in disarray, mostly because people are fighting over what leader they're going to follow. They had forgotten the unity that was given to them through the gospel, and instead they started taking sides against one another. Why? Well, they were doing what so many Christians do today. I think we've all been guilty of letting our opinions and our preferences have too much importance. We've raised our own thoughts to the height of the essentials, and anyone who doesn't fully agree with us is just plain wrong. Think about it. How can anybody not be of Paul? No. How can anybody not be of Apollos? No. Wait, you guys are wrong. No, how can anybody not be of Peter? Do you see the problem here? And you literally start seeing people camp and setting up camps inside the church. No, I'm with Ryan. No, I'm with Corey. No, I'm with Cody. No, I'm with the lay elders. Do you see the problem? And the disunity that could come? See, God has given us standards that we are to live by, yet we so often decide that our standards are better. It's part of the human condition. We think or act and behave in a certain way, and it makes sense to us. We understand it. That's why we act that way. It's why we think that way. It all makes sense. And for the life of us, we cannot figure out why someone else doesn't behave and think and act the same way that we do. Have you ever wondered that? Like you watch something on TV and you're like, how in the world could someone come to that conclusion? Well, maybe they're right. See, we think that being wise is doing this, is that living in this way is wise because most of us, and if we're honest with ourselves, we have an inflated view of who we are. Studies have shown that most people think they're much smarter than they actually are. We can blame it on our parents who constantly told us that we're good enough and smart enough and people love us. And we can blame it on those parents like we see on American Idol that tell their children who are not good singers, honey, you can do better next year and you'll make it. When the loving parent would say to their child, no, you're awful, stop. So we can blame our parents for this. Fact is that most of us, by definition, are average at best. And the Bible gives us these clear standards by which we are to live. But every day we go to work or we go to school or we spend time in front of a screen and we see how the world values and how different they are from what we see in the Bible. There's no escape from this. We're surrounded by worldviews that do not agree with God's standard as laid out in Scripture. See, where it ties back into the text is the Corinthians valued human wisdom. They valued intellect. They valued a good speaker. They valued someone who could maintain the attention of an audience, who could gain a following. To put it in common terms, they valued a high Twitter count, followers. They valued millions of Instagram followers. This is what they valued. They valued the abilities and talents and gifts above the one who was giving those abilities, talents, and gifts. They thought they were doing the right thing by digging their heels in and mirroring the culture. They embraced the exact thing that God had said, don't embrace. Christ was the reason for their existence as a church family, and they were allowing the wisdom of the world to seep in and to tear them apart. This is the wisdom Paul talks about in verse 18. If anyone thinks that he is wise in this age, let him become a fool, that he may become wise. This is a strange statement to some people, but that makes sense to Christians. The Corinthians could only become wise by becoming fools to the world. It's the only way. It's the only way that we can become wise, is by becoming fools to the world. Now, I'm not saying dress up like a clown and dance around like a maniac. I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is that the world views us as fools. They see what we do as foolishness. Embracing Jesus, someone who lived 2,000 years ago, who died. We believe that he was resurrected. The world rejects that. But embracing Jesus is foolishness to the world. Now, let me give you an example of what I mean by this foolishness. We lived in Florida for 4 years, and we were just north of Orlando. And our church, a small church, but it was a very, very diverse church. Of our membership and our regular attendees, only 50% were Anglo. About a third of our church was Latino. And in that third, there were a handful of people who either didn't speak English or who could barely speak English. And they would come to our church every Sunday. And communication was difficult for people, but we tried, we hugged, and we were friends, and we shared food and shared meals together, and we had each other in our homes, but communication was difficult. We would put my sermons into Google Translate, and we would print them out in Spanish, and those who couldn't speak English would listen to me speak in English, and they would read in Spanish. It was an interesting thing until I went off on a rabbit trail. And I figured a couple things. I figured, one, that if I'm a pastor, I need to shepherd them better. And if to shepherd them better, I need to be able to communicate with them. I didn't want them going to another church. I thought that they could grow in ours. So I used an app to study Spanish, and I did it every day with basic words, and you know what happened? I sounded like a baby learning how to speak a language. Gibberish. My accents were wrong. My pronunciations were wrong. I would use words in inappropriate situations. They were the simple words in the Spanish language. I spoke slowly to ensure that what I said was correct, but to someone who spoke Spanish as their first language, I sounded like a child. If my goal, though, was to speak Spanish fluently, what did I have to do? I had to master the simple things first. I had to speak like a little child so that I would have the correct foundation to learn the more difficult aspects of the language. I had to learn food. I had to conjugate verbs. I had to learn the animals and colors and all of those basic things. I had to learn those first before I could preach a sermon in Spanish. In other words, I had to sound like a fool before I could show any signs of proficiency in the language. Now, when we pursue godliness and real spiritual growth, and when we live out our faith, we look like fools. The world sees us make sacrifices for one another, and they think we're foolish. They see us coming to church on a Sunday morning in the middle of a pandemic, and they think you are fools. They see us giving money to a church, and they think we're fools. They see us giving our time, and they think we're fools. We may not value the soaring rhetoric and oratory skills like the Corinthians, but we do value, as the world does, expertise and education. One pastor says this: if a congregation were to have 10 men with doctorates who were only nominal in their commitment to the Lord and to His Word, and 10 other men who had only finished high school but who were completely sold out to the Lord and steeped in His Word, it should not be hard to decide which 10 men were most qualified to lead the church. This is where fighting and church splits happen. We are so quick to allow successful people, however we define that, to come into the church and become leaders. See, I care far less about a seminary education than I do about a devotion to the Lord. I would much rather have elders and leaders in our church who have no formal education but have spent the last 50 years on their knees and opening God's Word, studying this book, than having a bunch of PhDs on the wall. Well, this happens outside the church too. These values, these things that reject our foolishness. There's a professor at University of North Carolina named Bart Ehrman, and he's a New Testament scholar who has focused his scholarly research on Jesus and the development of early Christianity. He attended Moody Bible College and Wheaton College. He has written dozens of books about the Bible. Yet for all his degrees, and he has a PhD from Princeton, I don't think you can get much better than that. And for all the time that he studied God's Word, he studied the Bible, he is a self-avowed agnostic atheist. Intellectually, Ehrman is in the upper echelon, but his knowledge, his wisdom, has done nothing for the state of his soul. He's denied the one he spent his entire life studying. Now, he would agree that he's a smart man. He probably would even say that he's wise. But Paul writes in these verses that if anyone thinks he is wise, he's in for a surprising twist. Those who are really wise are wise for one reason and one reason only. God made them that way. Ehrman and countless others who have high IQs and loads of academic credentials are viewed in the same way the Corinthians viewed Paul, Apollos, and Peter. They thought they were worth following because they had something to say. Man, they seemed really smart. Man, they've got a lot of academic credentials. Wow, they've got a bunch of degrees on his wall. Secular scholars know what the Bible says, but they don't think it has any power. And this is the key for this passage. I don't care how much of the Bible you know, if it hasn't made an impact on your life, day-to-day life, it means nothing. If all of your knowledge is accumulated and you have degrees and you have time studying and reading and you can memorize the entire Bible, it means absolutely nothing if your life has not been changed by it. We rightly emphasize learning about the Bible because it's God's inerrant word, but it must be lived out. We must have some evidence of what the Bible says and how it matters to us. And the church in Corinth didn't get this. They were struggling with this. They seemed to have knowledge, But they didn't have right living. They desired more and more intellectual knowledge. But they weren't living it out. It didn't have any effect on them. This is a reminder for all of us that yes, knowledge is important, but without unity around the gospel, nothing else matters. Second point this morning is found in verses 21 and 22. It's the proper view of others. You'll see in verse 21, Paul starts by saying, "So then," meaning that he's building on the previous verses. And he's saying this, in other words, because of the problem in the church, you, Corinthians, you need to hear what I'm about to say. You must stop boasting in your leaders. We are fallible. We make mistakes. We will tell you things that, maybe not intentionally, but things that are not correct. We will sin. And what he's saying in this is that the bragging about your preferred teacher, your favorite pastor, your favorite preacher, is childish. Now there's a danger, an equal danger in here is to say, well, Paul's saying that we don't compliment anybody at this point, because that may be too close to boasting. The Christian life, though, is a balanced life, so this is not what I mean. The Christian life rarely goes to the extremes. I don't want you to brag about me. I don't want you to tell people that, man, Ryan's doing this at the church and Ryan's doing this. I don't want that, but I also don't want you to run out and not tell me if something actually made sense to you. Everyone, including myself, needs encouragement, and Paul is not saying to stop encouraging your leaders. The problem is that encouragement, that healthy encouragement, the godly encouragement, had become not encouragement anymore. It had become an idolization of those leaders. The people were bowing down at the altar of Paul and Apollos and Peter. Their entire way they practiced their faith was skewed. It wasn't just encouragement. The question is, do we do this? What is it that we value most in our leaders? This week I had the blessing to sit down for about an hour with someone who was on the pastor search committee last year to find me, to place me here. And the person told me what they were looking for in a pastor. And I'm not just saying that because I'm here, so obviously it sounds self-serving, but that's not why I'm saying this. The pastor search committee was looking for a man to come and preach the word and not to be a dynamic leader or a charismatic speaker. That wasn't the intention. They looked at what the Bible says, and then they looked at what the church needed, because all churches are different and all churches have different needs, and they sought the will of God. But let's be honest, do most of us think this way? We like our leaders who can speak well, who can captivate us, who are energetic. We want our leaders to be someone that we're excited about following, someone who has a command of an audience. We follow those who attract us. Now, those of you who follow preachers or teachers, do you watch anyone who has a really strange way of speaking? Could you be a member of a church, and this sounds so silly, but could you be a member of the church where the pastor is, in your opinion, ugly? Now, all of you would say absolutely not. Could you do that? Could you be inside of a church, or could you follow someone where the pastor had a lisp or some kind of physical issue that made his speaking awkward? Could you do that? Now, here's why I'm asking that. Is because if we look down the list of the most popular churches in the country, what do you see? You see mostly pretty good-looking guys. Guys who are very gifted at public speaking. Guys who can stand in front of people and give a speech or give a sermon with ease and with this charisma that just oozes out of them. And we see this. Why? People follow after people who are attractive to them, whether it's through their voice or through their looks. Now, I think we all have our quirks, those things that we do that we can't really support with our facts. Why are we attracted to certain sounds or to certain looks or to certain ways of communication? But here's the question, is that not worldly? And I'm not saying worldly is in a sense of going to send you to hell, but I'm saying, is that not worldly wisdom? Isn't that the way the culture values? Good grief, look at Hollywood. How many ugly celebrities are there? There's not that many. Chiseled abs, nice jawbone, full head of hair, personality that people just adore. We think about that when we vote for politicians. Man, he just sounds like a politician. The idea of a church leader being praised for his communication is what the outside world values. It's not what the church should value. Paul says, let no one boast in men. Boasting is giving one person honor over another. Now think about what the Corinthian church would have been like had Paul or Apollos or Peter been false teachers. The church would have crumbled. A church that loses its sight on the gospel is no longer a church. Paul's passion for the life-changing truth of the gospel is so strong that he's willing to lose friends, co-workers, or admirers in the ministry for the sake of preventing a church from falling apart. So in verse 21, Paul says that no one should boast in men, but look at the second half. For all things are yours, whether Paul or Apollos or Cephas, Peter, or the world, or life, or death, or the present, or the future, all are yours. See, the Corinthian church, they were living at a substandard level. We're in the middle right now of a pandemic. It has infected over 17 million people worldwide, over 4 million in the United States alone. Back in the spring, the elders here had to make a difficult decision whether or not we were going to continue our services, and we decided for a season, for a few months, that we had stopped, and then we came back, but we had to make this decision. It was difficult, because we know how vital this time is for us, and some churches haven't opened yet, or some churches have opened, and then they've had to close again. Now, my point in sharing this is that during our time away from one another, even now, our time is limited. You're not supposed to go hug someone or even shake hands or sit really close with someone. We recognize that a part of who we are is missing. Sure, we had a live stream. We had music and we had the sermon and we had announcements. But let's be honest, it wasn't the same thing. We couldn't hear one another sing. We couldn't see the faces, even with a mask, of our church family. The Bible says that we can't neglect the assembling together. And that's because the gathering is essential for the church family. But the advancement of technology has allowed us to have at least some sense of normalcy during a pandemic. But what this technology has also allowed is a sense that the gathered assembly just isn't important for some. Even before the pandemic, I'd meet people who would say, well, no, I can stay home and I can watch my favorite preacher and I can watch this church on TV or online and I'm okay. It's convenient, isn't it? You can sleep in on Sunday mornings. You don't have to get dressed. You can take your time making breakfast, and then when it's convenient for you, you push a button or you tap a screen and up comes the sermon, and 45 minutes later, you've done your religious duty. Everything is there for your convenience. Now, I am so grateful for technology. And I appreciate the fact that we're able to connect with people who cannot come to service for whatever reason it is. But online preaching and online music is not the gathered assembly. Now, suppose we decided this, that keeping this building lit and keeping this building air-conditioned or heated is just too expensive. Trying to find teachers for the kids' classrooms is just too difficult. We have to buy curriculum. We have to set up the classrooms. We have to make sure they're clean. We've got to do all of those things that people do every single Sunday. And we just decide, you know what, that's too difficult. So suppose we decided we're going fully online. Online everything. Like we're not even going to have a building anymore. So everything is done online, not just during a pandemic, but indefinitely. Everyone can watch the same sermon and sing the same songs in the comfort of their own homes. No more building, just me on a screen indefinitely. Worst nightmare. Now, some may like this. Some may really appreciate this, but most of you would not, because you're here. Because you recognize that it would be less than what God has intended for you. You'd see that, yes, you'd likely learn about the Bible through watching a preacher on the screen. Yes, you could grow in your knowledge of Scripture, but you'd be shortchanging yourselves. You'd miss the relationships and the discipleship that are essential for the growth as a Christian. Now, that's not the same, but it's a very similar concept to what was happening in the church in Corinth. No, it wasn't from a pandemic, but the church was shortchanging themselves of the special unity that only God could provide and only the local church can sustain. The Corinthians choosing their favorite teachers and then drawing lines between themselves was living below what God had designed for them. Now, watching a pastor on a screen may fill a void for a season, but it is inherently substandard. Watching a screen in your home is not what any of the New Testament writers envision when they talk about the church. It is shortchanging ourselves. And the Corinthian believers had shortchanged themselves because in strictly aligning to one teacher, they had neglected all of the other teachers that God had provided to them. All things were theirs, meaning that the teaching of Paul and Apollos and Peter belonged to them. Picking sides and then battling about who picked a better side, it wasn't only childish, it was stunting their growth as Christians. They were too busy fighting about who followed the better teacher that they missed out on the wonderful things that God has given them. Listen, I know that not everybody will get the same benefit out of my preaching. And I don't say this to be self-serving, but that is not an excuse to separate yourself from the local assembly. That's division. That runs contrary to the unity found in the gospel. Why? Because Paul says all things are yours. And that leads me to the next point, the second half of verse 22. All things are yours, whether Paul or Apollos or Cephas or the world or life or death or the present or the future. All are yours. Turn to Romans 8. Keep in mind as you're turning there, the same person, Paul, who wrote 1 Corinthians, also wrote the letter to the church in Rome. Paul knew suffering. He knew suffering in two ways. He knew suffering, the fact that he inflicted it before he became a Christian. He inflicted it upon Christians. And then after he became a Christian, after God miraculously saved him, Paul understood suffering from the rejection and the beatings and the imprisonment. Look at Romans 8, 35 through 39. Keep in mind what Paul just wrote in our text today about all things being ours. Romans 8:35. Who shall separate us from the love of Christ? Shall tribulation or distress or persecution or famine or nakedness or danger or sword? As it is written, for your sake we are being killed all the day long. We are regarded as sheep to be slaughtered. No, in all these things we are more than conquerors through him who loved us. For I am sure that neither death, nor life, nor angels, nor rulers, nor things present, nor things to come, nor powers, nor height, nor depth, nor anything else in all creation will be able to separate us from the love of God in Christ Jesus our Lord. All things. All things. And what we can see in these words is that Paul trusts in the sovereignty of God. Those things that he suffered were not Paul's choice. None of us would want to be jailed. None of us would want to suffer beatings. None of us would want to be scorned and mocked and ridiculed. None of us would. But they were God's choice for them. God allowed those things to happen to Paul so that God would get glory through Paul's obedience and Paul's ministering to people who were hurting and suffering. Now look at Romans 8 again. Let's go back to verses 28 through 30. And we know that for those who love God, all things work together for good, for those who are called according to his purpose. Who are those called according to his purpose? For those whom he foreknew, he also predestined to be conformed to the image of his Son, in order that he might be the firstborn among many brothers. And those whom he predestined, he also called. And those whom he called, he also justified. And those whom he justified, he also glorified. See, for the Christian, all things work together for good, even those that are difficult and harmful, and even those things that may kill us. All things work together for good. I could not trust or worship a God that didn't have sovereign control over the universe. That even in the midst of a pandemic, when things are insane and we're wearing masks and we're separating from family and friends, we can't go to the hospitals, we can't visit certain people. In all of that, people getting sick and people dying, God is still in control. That he has not stepped away from his throne. All things, the good, the bad, the ugly, and everything in between are ours. This brings us to the last point this morning. It's a proper view of God. This is found in verse 23. All are yours. And read this. And you are Christ's, and Christ is God's. Now I want you to think about the gospel this morning. Every single week that we gather, whoever is preaching in this pulpit, we do our best to present the gospel so that if someone is not a believer in Christ, they will leave here and they will have no excuse. That we give the gospel to people who are not believers, but we also give the gospel every week to those who are believers because we need to be reminded of this daily, every single day. That we are not the ones who've done the saving, we are not the ones who keep ourselves safe, and that God always keeps His promises. We need to be reminded of this every single week, but I want you to think through what the gospel is and what your response to it should be. Start at the beginning. God created everything out of nothing to display His own glory. And the most important part of His creation was humanity, because we are the only creatures that are created in the image and likeness of God. Everything was perfect, but humanity sinned and broke the communion that we once had with God. And because God is perfect and just, sin, no matter the size, cannot go unpunished. But ever since Adam and Eve disobeyed God, God had a plan to restore creation back to its original design. In Genesis 3, just after sin entered the world, God made a promise that He would provide a Messiah who would crush the head of the one who enticed the first two humans. The Messiah, Jesus, has forever been and fully God, but He would, thousands of years later, take on humanity. He would become a man so that He could take the punishment that only a human could take. That He paid the penalty for us. Look at Colossians 1:15 through 20. I'll read this to you. He, Jesus, is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn of all creation. For by Him all things were created in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or dominions or rulers or authorities. All things were created through Him and for Him. And He is before all things, and in Him all things hold together. And He is the head of the body, the church. He is the beginning, the firstborn from the dead, that in everything He might be preeminent. For in Him all the fullness of God was pleased to dwell, and through Him to reconcile to Himself all things, whether on earth or in heaven, making peace by the blood of the cross. Jesus, perfect in every single way, took the nails in His hands and His feet. He took the crown of thorns on His head. He suffered the shame of being killed like a criminal. God's justice was given to the only person who did not deserve it. Now, if you're a Christian, Jesus did this for you. God's justice and wrath was poured out on His Son so that you could be freed from your bondage of sin. You were bought by the blood of Christ. What is your response to this? You belong to Jesus. He has unified you. He has given you all the wonderful things that you have. Don't boast in anything else. It is a waste of time. Boast in the one who has purchased you with His blood. Would you pray with me? Father, we are grateful for the unity that You've given to us, that You've allowed us to be unified through the gospel, and that Your blood is enough to cover all of our sins. Lord, we are so grateful that all things are ours and all things are Yours, and that we are so grateful that even in the midst of the worst tragedy that we've ever seen in humanity's history, the slaying of Jesus, that You were able to purchase us through that. Lord, help us to trust in You more. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.